My ex-wife cheated on me when my brother passed away, divorced me, and then claimed her kid was mine 5 years later. Hey Reddit, I'm Jake, 35, and I've been through some things that I wouldn't wish on anyone. 5 years ago, my life was turned upside down when my brother died suddenly, and my wife at the time decided that was the perfect moment to betray me. We divorced, and I thought I'd finally put all the pain behind me until a few months ago when she came back into my life, claiming that her 5-year-old son was mine. It's been a roller coaster of emotions, and I'm still trying to figure out how to deal with it all. Here's my story. I grew up in a tight-knit family in a small town in Ohio. My parents were hard-working, no-nonsense people who raised my brother, Matt, and me to stick together no matter what. Matt was 2 years younger than me, but we were inseparable growing up. We did everything together: sports, camping trips, and getting into the kind of trouble that only small-town boys could find. We were more than brothers, we were best friends. We had a simple upbringing, but we were happy. Our parents worked long hours, my dad as a mechanic and my mom as a nurse, so Matt and I spent a lot of time fending for ourselves after school. We'd ride our bikes all over town, fishing in the creek, climbing trees, and dreaming about the future. Even when we fought, we always had each other's backs. Matt was the kind of person who could make anyone laugh, and he had this way of seeing the good in everything, no matter how bad things got. As we got older, Matt and I took different paths. I stayed close to home, getting a job in construction right out of high school. I started as a laborer, hauling concrete and working in the freezing cold Ohio winters, but I didn't mind. I liked the work, the satisfaction of seeing something tangible come together because of your own hands. I worked my way up over the years, eventually becoming a project manager. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and it paid the bills. Matt, on the other hand, had bigger ambitions. He'd always wanted to see the world, to do something that mattered, so he enlisted in the military right after high school. He served several tours overseas, and every time he came home, it felt like a victory. I was so proud of him, and our bond never wavered despite the distance. He'd come back with stories of his time abroad, some funny, some harrowing, and some that he could never fully put into words. He saw things that changed him, and though he always put on a brave face, I knew those experiences haunted him. During Matt's deployments, I met Melissa. She was beautiful, smart, and the kind of woman who could light up a room with her smile. We met at a mutual friend's wedding, and we clicked instantly. She was charming and outgoing, with a quick wit that made her the life of every party. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I'd met someone who understood me. We started dating, and before long, we were inseparable. Melissa and I got married after a year of dating. Our wedding was small but beautiful, held in a little chapel in our hometown with all our family and friends there to celebrate. Matt was my best man, and I remember him giving a speech that had everyone laughing and crying at the same time. He talked about our childhood, about how proud he was of me, and how Melissa and I were perfect for each other. It was one of the best days of my life, and I felt like everything was finally falling into place. But things took a dark turn when Matt came back from his last tour overseas. He was different, quieter, more withdrawn. He'd seen things that no one should ever have to see, and he struggled to adjust to life back home. He'd always been the rock of our family, the one who kept everyone smiling, but now it was like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. We'd go out for drinks, and he'd barely touch his beer, just staring off into space like he was a million miles away. I tried to be there for him, but nothing I said seemed to help. I remember the last conversation we had like it was yesterday. It was a cold December night, and I was at work, trying to wrap up a project before the holidays. Matt called me, sounding more down than usual. I was busy, stressed, and I didn't pick up right away. When I finally called him back, it went straight to voicemail. I figured I'd talk to him later, that he just needed some time to himself. But that call never came. The next morning, I got the news that Matt had taken his own life. I was devastated. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me, and I was left in a free fall with no way to make sense of what had happened. I couldn't stop thinking about that missed call, wondering if there was something I could have said or done that would have changed things. The guilt was unbearable, and I spent days replaying every moment in my head, searching for answers that I would never find. Matt's death shattered our family. My parents were inconsolable, and I was struggling just to get through each day. I leaned heavily on Melissa during that time, thinking she'd be my rock, the one person who could help me navigate the darkest moment of my life. But instead of being there for me, Melissa grew distant. She spent more time away from home, often going out with friends or staying late at work. I tried to talk to her about it, to tell her how much I was hurting, but she always brushed me off, saying that I was too caught up in my own grief to see that she was struggling too. I didn't realize it at the time, but Melissa had been pulling away from me for months. While I was consumed by my loss, she was out living a double life. I'd come home late from work, exhausted and emotionally drained, only to find her gone without so much as a text. When she was home, she was glued to her phone, texting someone she refused to talk about. I tried to brush it off, telling myself that she was just trying to cope in her own way, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. One night, I came home early, hoping to surprise her with dinner. When I walked into the bedroom, Melissa was lying on the bed, her phone clutched in her hand and a message thread open with a name I didn't recognize. I asked her who it was, and she brushed it off, saying it was just a friend. But the way she quickly locked her screen and turned away told me everything I needed to know. I couldn't ignore it any longer. When Melissa went to take a shower, I picked up her phone and scrolled through her messages. What I found confirmed my worst fears. There were flirty texts, late-night meetups, and photos that left no doubt she was having an affair. My heart sank as I realized that while I was grieving the loss of my brother, the person I loved most was betraying me in the worst way possible. I confronted Melissa that night, and she didn't even try to deny it. Instead, she turned the blame on me, saying that I'd been too consumed by my own pain to see her needs, that she felt neglected and unloved. It was like a slap in the face. I'd lost my brother, and now I was losing my wife, and she was making it all my fault. I kicked her out that night, too angry and hurt to even think straight. My life was falling apart, and I had no idea how to pick up the pieces. The days following the discovery of Melissa's affair were some of the darkest I'd ever experienced. I was grieving Matt's death, reeling from Melissa's betrayal, and struggling to keep my head above water. I'd go to work, putting on a brave face, but inside, I was completely shattered. I'd barely slept, and when I did, I'd dream of Matt, his voice calling out to me from the other side of a phone line I could never reach. Melissa and I filed for divorce shortly after the confrontation. There was no attempt to reconcile, no counseling, no let's try to work this out. We were done, and the separation was inevitable. The legal process was messy, dividing assets, selling the house, and trying to figure out what went wrong. I didn't care about the money or the house anymore. All I wanted was to sever ties and move on. I moved out of our home and into a small, dingy apartment on the other side of town. It was a far cry from the life I'd known, a place with stained carpets, creaky floors, and neighbors who blasted music at all hours of the night. I couldn't bring myself to unpack the boxes that lined the walls. They were full of memories I didn't want to confront: wedding photos, Matt's things, reminders of a life that had been ripped away. To cope, I threw myself into work, volunteering for extra shifts, overtime, and any project that would keep my mind off everything. My coworkers knew I was going through a rough patch, but I didn't share details. I wasn't ready to talk about it. Every time someone asked how I was doing, I'd just nod and say, "I'm fine," even though I was anything but. I tried to find solace in old friends, but most of them didn't know how to handle the situation. Some were sympathetic but awkward, not sure what to say or how to help. Others were judgmental, throwing out cliches like "time heals all wounds" or "everything happens for a reason." I couldn't stand the pity or the empty platitudes, so I distanced myself, sinking further into my own isolation. There were nights when I'd drive around aimlessly, just to feel something other than the suffocating silence of my apartment. I'd pass by places that Matt and I used to hang out, the park where we played baseball as kids, the diner where we'd grab burgers after a long day. Each spot was a painful reminder of the brother I'd lost and the life that was slipping further out of reach. In the months that followed, I tried to rebuild some semblance of a routine. I got back into working out, hitting the gym to burn off the anger that simmered just beneath the surface. I took up hiking, finding comfort in the solitude of the trails and the rhythm of my own footsteps. I even started seeing a therapist, someone who could help me make sense of the tangled mess of grief, guilt, and betrayal that I was carrying. Little by little, I began to heal. I reconnected with my parents, spending weekends at their house, helping with chores, and just being there for each other. We'd sit around the dinner table, talking about Matt, sharing memories, and trying to find comfort in our shared pain. We were all hurting, but being together helped. I started dating again, though it was slow and awkward. I was guarded, keeping people at arm's length, afraid of letting anyone get too close. I didn't want to be hurt again, and I didn't trust myself to make good choices when it came to relationships. Every woman I met was measured against Melissa's betrayal, and it was hard to shake the fear that history would repeat itself. But despite my hesitations, I kept pushing forward. I wanted to believe that there was still good out there, that love was possible even after everything I'd been through. I wasn't looking for a quick fix or a way to forget the past, I just wanted to feel connected again, to find someone who saw me for who I was, scars and all. I thought I'd finally put Melissa behind me. We hadn't spoken since the divorce, and I'd done everything I could to move on. But 5 years later, just when I was starting to feel like myself again, she showed up out of nowhere, this time with a little boy in tow, claiming that he was mine. It was a crisp fall afternoon when Melissa showed up at my door, 5 years after I'd last seen her. I'd spent the day cleaning my apartment and watching a football game, enjoying a rare moment of peace and solitude. When the doorbell rang, I wasn't expecting anyone, and I assumed it was just a delivery or a neighbor needing something. But when I opened the door, there she was, Melissa, standing on my doorstep with a young boy beside her. The sight of her hit me like a punch to the gut. She looked almost the same, still beautiful, but there was something different in her eyes, a tiredness that hadn't been there before. The boy, who I soon learned was named Sam, looked to be about 5 years old, with messy dark hair and big blue eyes that felt hauntingly familiar. He was shy, clinging to Melissa's leg and avoiding my gaze. "Jake, can we talk?" Melissa said, her voice strained and uncertain. "It's about him." I didn't want to let her in. The sight of her brought back a flood of painful memories, Matt's death, her betrayal, the divorce. I didn't need this, not now, not ever. But there was something in her tone, a sense of urgency that I couldn't ignore. I stepped aside and let them in, my mind racing with questions. We sat down in the living room, the tension thick in the air. Sam sat quietly on the couch, playing with a toy car while Melissa and I exchanged tense, awkward pleasantries. I couldn't take my eyes off the boy, there was something about him that tugged at my heart, something that felt strangely familiar yet completely foreign. Finally, Melissa took a deep breath and dropped the bombshell. "Jake, I need to tell you something. Sam, he's your son." Her words hung in the air, heavy and surreal. I stared at her, my mind struggling to process what she'd just said. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice edged with disbelief. "How is that even possible?" Melissa shifted uncomfortably, wringing her hands as she spoke. "I found out I was pregnant right after the divorce. I didn't tell you because I wasn't sure how you'd react, and honestly, I didn't think you'd want anything to do with me. I thought I could handle it on my own, but things have been really hard lately." I sat there, stunned. None of this made sense. Melissa had never mentioned anything about a pregnancy during the divorce, and the timing felt suspiciously convenient. But as I looked at Sam, who was still quietly playing, I couldn't deny the resemblance. He had my eyes blue like Matt's and mine, and the realization hit me like a tidal wave. "Why now?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Why wait 5 years to tell me?" Melissa sighed, her expression tinged with guilt. "I'm sorry, Jake. I really thought I could do it on my own, but I lost my job, and I'm struggling to keep up with bills. Sam deserves to know his father, and I thought you'd want to be a part of his life." It felt like the walls were closing in. I'd spent years trying to rebuild my life, to heal from the wounds Melissa had left behind, and now she was dragging me back into her mess. I wanted to scream, to tell her to get out and take her lies with her, but then I looked at Sam, this innocent little boy who had no idea what was going on, and my anger wavered. If there was even a chance he was mine, I couldn't just turn my back. I told Melissa I needed time to think and that we'd figure out the next steps later. She nodded, and with a hasty goodbye, she left, taking Sam with her. As the door closed behind them, I sank onto the couch, feeling completely overwhelmed. My mind was a whirlwind of doubt, anger, and fear. Could Sam really be mine? And if he was, what did that mean for the life I'd built? After Melissa's visit, I couldn't get Sam out of my head. The resemblance, the timing, everything about the situation gnawed me, and I knew I had to get to the bottom of it. I didn't trust Melissa, she'd lied to me before, and there was no reason to believe she wouldn't lie again. But if there was even a chance that Sam was my son, I had to know the truth. I called Melissa the next day and told her that if she really believed Sam was mine, we needed to get a paternity test. I wasn't going to take her word for it, not after everything she'd put me through. She hesitated, her voice cracking with something that almost sounded like fear, but eventually, she agreed. We set up an appointment at a local clinic, and the waiting game began. Those weeks were some of the longest of my life. Every day felt like an eternity, and every time my phone buzzed, my heart would skip a beat. I was terrified of what the results might say, but I was also desperate to know the truth. Part of me hoped that Sam wasn't mine, that this was just another one of Melissa's manipulations. But another part, the part that had seen the boy's eyes and the way he looked so much like Matt when we were kids, couldn't help but wonder. On the day of the test, the atmosphere was tense and uncomfortable. Melissa and I barely spoke as we sat in the waiting room, each lost in our own thoughts. Sam sat quietly beside her, his little legs swinging off the chair, oblivious to the gravity of the situation. When it was finally time, I went in, gave my sample, and watched as Melissa did the same. It all felt so clinical, so cold, and I couldn't shake the feeling that my entire world was hanging in the balance. The clinic told us it would take 2 weeks to get the results, and those 2 weeks felt like a lifetime. I threw myself into work, trying to distract myself from the constant anxiety that gnawed at me. I'd lie awake at night, replaying every moment in my mind, wondering what I'd do if Sam was mine. Could I be a father after everything that had happened? Could I forgive Melissa enough to co-parent? The questions were endless, and there were no easy answers. Finally, the call came. I was at work, in the middle of a meeting, when my phone buzzed with the clinic's number. My heart pounded as I stepped outside to take the call, my hands shaking as I answered. The nurse on the other end was polite but direct. Sam was not my son. The results were definitive, and there was no doubt about it. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly followed by a surge of anger. I'd been right not to trust Melissa, and now I had the proof that she'd lied to me once again. I called her immediately, my voice cold and unyielding. "Sam's not mine," I said bluntly. "I don't know what you were hoping to get out of this, but I'm done." There was a long pause on the other end, and then Melissa's voice broke. "I'm sorry, Jake. I really thought he was yours. I didn't know what else to do." Her apology meant nothing to me. I'd spent years trying to rebuild my life after her betrayal, and now she'd tried to drag me back into her chaos with lies and manipulation. I told her that I wanted nothing to do with her or Sam and that I was done being a part of her mess. She tried to protest, to explain, but I didn't care. I hung up, feeling a strange mix of sadness, anger, and vindication. After the truth came out, I was determined to put Melissa behind me once and for all. I blocked her number, unfollowed her on social media, and made it clear to our mutual friends that I wanted nothing to do with her. I was done being her pawn, done letting her lies dictate my life. I'd spent too long grieving what I'd lost, and it was time to start living for myself again. I threw myself back into work, taking on new projects that reignited my passion for construction. I started working on renovating old houses, turning rundown properties into beautiful homes. It was hard, physical work, but it gave me a sense of purpose and a tangible way to see the results of my efforts. Every time I finished a project, it felt like I was rebuilding a part of myself that Melissa had tried to tear down. I also reconnected with old friends, making an effort to get out of my shell and let people back into my life. I joined a local hiking group, where I met a great bunch of people who shared my love for the outdoors. We'd spend weekends exploring trails, camping under the stars, and swapping stories around the campfire. It was therapeutic, a way to reset and find peace in the simplicity of nature. Therapy played a huge role in my healing as well. I'd been seeing a therapist since Matt's death, but after the ordeal with Melissa, I realized there were still a lot of unresolved feelings that I needed to address. My therapist helped me work through the lingering anger, the guilt I'd carried for so long, and the trust issues that had kept me from fully moving on. I learned to forgive myself for the things I couldn't control and to set boundaries that protected my peace. I also began to open up to the idea of dating again. It wasn't easy at trusting someone after everything that had happened felt like a huge risk, but I didn't want to let Melissa's betrayal define my future. I met a few people through friends and dating apps, and while there were plenty of awkward first dates and dead-end conversations, I eventually found someone who made me feel like myself again. Her name was Sarah, and she was everything Melissa wasn't: kind, genuine, and supportive in a way that felt natural and effortless. We met at a mutual friend's barbecue, and from the moment we started talking, I felt a connection that I hadn't felt in years. Sarah was smart, funny, and unapologetically herself, and being around her felt like a breath of fresh air. We took things slow, both of us cautious about jumping into anything too quickly. But as the months passed, our bond grew stronger. Sarah understood my past, my pain, and my hesitations, but she never pushed me to be anything other than myself. With her, I felt seen, heard, and valued in a way that I hadn't in a long time. As our relationship deepened, I started to realize that I didn't have to carry my past with me forever. Melissa's betrayal, Matt's death, and all the pain I'd endured were parts of my story, but they didn't define me. I was stronger than the worst things that had happened to me, and I was capable of building a future that was full of love, hope, and new beginnings. A few years have passed since Melissa's last attempt to drag me back into her life, and I can honestly say that I've never been happier. I've built a life that I'm proud of, a life that isn't defined by my past, but by the choices I've made to move forward. I'm still working in construction, but I've also started a side business renovating old houses, turning rundown properties into beautiful homes. It's hard work, but it's deeply satisfying, and it gives me a sense of purpose that I'd been missing. Sarah and I are still together, and our relationship has only grown stronger with time. She's been my rock through everything, supporting me in ways that I never knew I needed. We've traveled, adopted a rescue dog named Max, and even started talking about buying a place of our own. For the first time in a long time, I'm excited about the future, and I'm grateful for the journey that brought me here. I've also reconnected with my family in a way that feels more meaningful than ever. My parents and I have grown closer as we've navigated our grief over losing Matt. We've learned to lean on each other, to share our pain, and to celebrate the good moments when they come. We've honored Matt's memory in ways that keep his spirit alive, and while the loss will always be a part of us, we've found a way to keep moving forward. As for Melissa, I've heard bits and pieces about her life through the grapevine, but I've kept my distance. I don't harbor any ill will. I've made peace with what happened and let go of the anger that used to consume me. I hope she finds the stability and support she needs, but I also know that I can't be a part of her story anymore. I've chosen to focus on my own happiness, and that's all I can do. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that life doesn't always go the way you plan. You can do everything right, love with all your heart, and still end up hurt. But that doesn't mean you have to stay stuck in the pain. You can rebuild, you can heal, and you can find joy in the most unexpected places. I've lost a lot, but I've also gained so much more: new friendships, new opportunities, and a new understanding of what it means to truly live. Reddit update, the aftermath. Opie, my ex-wife, cheated on me when my brother passed away, divorced me, and then claimed her kid was mine 5 years later. Hey everyone, I wanted to give an update and thank you all for the support. The last few years have been a wild ride, but I've come out the other side stronger and happier than I ever thought possible. I'm in a great relationship, I've got a job I love, and I've finally made peace with my past. I've learned that it's okay to let go of the things you can't change and to focus on building the life you want. To anyone out there who's struggling, just know that you're not alone. Life has a way of throwing curveballs, but you are stronger than you think. Keep moving forward, set boundaries that protect your peace, and don't be afraid to open your heart again. The right people will show up when you least expect it. Thanks for being a part of my journey. Here's to new beginnings.